Cheers, guys. Epix911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for August 18th in what is turning out to be a pretty good news-packed day. Kind of like I said in one of last week's videos where I said, look, from now, and I know it's kind of Captain Obvious, but from now to the holidays, for anybody who thinks it's been moving a little too slow, rest assured, things are going to heat up marketing-wise. Whether it's games, hardware, we're going to see. You know, the next big date we have is that Sony PlayStation date. I wouldn't put it past Oculus to time that release, you know, for the Oculus Touch between there and the holiday season. But I definitely think it's going to launch before the holiday season. It would be stupid to not, unless they're having real quality issues, right? But like I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And to the contrary, it sounds like they're making really good use of the time that they have had and continue to have. So let's just chat really quick preamble about yesterday. So yesterday I played Wrath of the Fire God. This was a game that I purchased strictly on a frickin' whim. I didn't plan it, hadn't intended, but it was kind of to that point where, you know, like I was saying, where people think it's moving a little bit slow. The first day, honestly, since I got my first VR unit, where I was like, okay, I'm a little, not bored of my existing experiences, because I've still got a lot of playing to do in them, but kind of looking for something different, right? So I basically just picked whatever was first in the virtual reality Steam store filter and did the same for Oculus, but it was the Vive one that caught my eye. Just the Wrath of the Fire God, did not expect much about it, played it, and just had my expectations blown away. But that wasn't very hard to do because they were pretty much negative something. Not zero, but negative something. I honestly wasn't expecting much. I was thinking I was going to make a lot of negative comments throughout it, maybe chastising it a little bit, making fun of it, the typical early access, and it wasn't like that at all. So the opportunity to be elitist was lost on me. So I ended up enjoying it, and my wife loved watching me play so much that she wanted to give it a go right after, so I filmed her doing it, and it was just awesome. It was hilarious, right? Seeing her bopping around the room VR and having a workout literally was just priceless, right? So if you got to wait, you know, for a Steam sale, by all means. But right now, even just as early access, I don't regret the purchase one little bit. There's kind of the my derp moment. One of you pointed out to me today that, or asked, you know, Epix, could you have grabbed the arrows from the quiver rather than reaching to your back? And I thought about that for a second. And then, you know, I had the big facepalm moment where I was thinking, oh, damn, he's probably right. I could have grabbed them from there all along, because easily the biggest workout was me constantly torquing my arm back and forth to grab arrows from my damn quiver. If that's true, well, I'll mention it to you guys, but I'm going to feel like a schmuck because the quiver was literally beside me and I could have done probably a lot better, right? So that kind of made me laugh and chuckle. I can't wait after this video to find out what the truth is on that. So let's get into the news, guys. Big headline today was Brendan, CEO of Oculus Rift, tweet that, and here's his exact tweet, Rift hits retail in Europe and Canada September 20th. In-store touch demos begin in October. Now, there was no mention of which stores. There was no mention of price, which I, until we hear otherwise, I'm going to assume is going to be the same at a retail outlet. But what I think is good about this move, and I will report on it as soon as I do hear about that, is just the old customer service thing, right? A lot of you Rift owners have come forward to me, either privately or on the forums, to talk about your massive disappointment with Oculus Rift support, right? With their customer service. That a lot of us were lucky the HTC Vive had the issue and not the Rift. So that's kind of crappy to hear. And he ended it by saying, be thankful you haven't had an issue yet. And I haven't, so yeah, I kind of do feel that way because I really wouldn't want to have to experience that, right? But again, being able to buy it in retail stores, at least for those first few weeks, if there's something horribly obviously wrong, it's the store's problem. Well, ultimately it's yours, but the store is going to help you because it falls within their, whatever, 12, 15, 7, 30 days, 90, whatever they happen to have, right? Which is only a good thing. So it'll be nice, especially here in Canada, to see that alternative. The next headline has to do from the other guys, the HTC Vive folks. And Raymond Pao, who is Vice President of HTC New Technologies, was asked in San Francisco recently at a conference his thoughts about competition, right, with Oculus. And I like his quote, his full answer, and I'm going to read it. Oculus is not our competition. Much has been made about our two companies, but at HTC, our chief concern is to see VR grow into the next great computing platform in the world. We are pushing for success in VR and our hope is that all VR companies find success in order to drive greater adoption for the industry. And he was then asked about collaboration, to which he stated, we do talk with Oculus, and we talk even more often with Sony. We don't necessarily share our company secrets, but we see all of these people regularly at panels or VR events, and the relationships are always positive. Now, my takeaway from that is that's awesome. And it's what I talked about, right? Where I said right now, these companies need each other. Oculus needs Vive, right? Vive needs Rift. Both need Sony. And Sony needs them to have a successful launch. It's all tied together, right? They have common interests that personally I believe are way more important than who has a better fiscal year, right? Although shareholders of those companies would probably not agree with me on that, and that's fair enough, right? But yeah, the fact that they're having communication is good. And let's hope that continues and it doesn't cross over into too adversarial. I mean, that can also lead to innovation, right? But it can also make people get really pissy in their little sandbox and not want to share their toys. And you get the whole, the digital rights and the not open source or open this. So, hey, keep the status quo. It's working for all of you guys right now. That's all we need. Just keep doing that. Now, next story comes from Upload VR, and Oculus's Nate Mitchell was asked about some of the rumors that we've been hearing about HTC Vive, namely the fact that they may come out with a revised HTC Vive HMD that is a little more streamlined, maybe a little less bulky, the things that they wanted to do, right? Well, Nate, with regards to Oculus, said they don't have any plans. So again, the other one is just a rumor. It hasn't been substantiated as far as I know, but I take Nate at his word. He said they want to put that innovation into CV2, right? And seeing how much time they spend on stuff. Look, how long they've been at this and how long they've been working on Oculus Touch. Yeah, I can see that, and I can take him at his word. Now, speaking of that, I talked earlier that I was going to mention the Oculus Touch controllers again. And I've heard from quite a few of you, Xlord B and some others, that debate where we're going back and forth with, how is it going to compare to the Vive's controllers, right? And I'm seeing a lot of, personally, I haven't tried them. I can't wait to try them. Hopefully I can try them before, the official launch, if there's some kind of pre-order or something. I'll figure it out, right, as we get close. But there's been all kinds of little enhancements. They've really been using the time to get these enhancements squared away. And this story concerns Jamie Feltham. He's an author at Upload VR, where I get a lot of the virtual reality news from. And he had an opportunity to try the touches. And he noticed when he brought them really close together, they stuck together. Magnets. They're magnetic. So he approached an Oculus booth some employees in Nokia's booth after that, and they confirmed that this was a feature addition to the specific revision that he was using. And this is something that they're going to launch with because it joins them together in such a way they become easier to store, you don't lose them, right? And they stay in an upright position. You're not putting stress on buttons, controllers. You can literally clamp them together, put them on a shelf, throw a piece of cloth over, or don't, right? Whichever, and pick them up, separate them, and play again. So I thought that was a cool little touch, and I'm hearing all kinds of things about these controls. But again, a lot of that is just hearsay, rumors, secondhand stuff. We need to try these for ourselves and see how good they are, and I can't wait. Now, this next company, Nokia, and this does tie into virtual reality, but Nokia has been around for a long time. And if you are watching this and you are very young, you may not know that these guys were huge in cell phones. The early to late, I would say to mid-2000s, had a lot to do with BlackBerry, Nokia, and they were doing some pretty cool things. Like, they were doing mobile games before that was really a big deal or a big thing, right? They had their N-Gage, which definitely had its share of complaints and shortcomings. Me personally, those phone-style buttons sucked because I had a buddy who had one of these. He actually worked quality assurance at a company that was making games for the Nokia. And yeah, it just felt horrible, right? But still, it was an innovative product, definitely ahead of its time, because which way did Android and iOS end up going, right? They went into that same direction. They just pulled it off better. So where it ties into VR is, I mentioned probably about 2 weeks ago that Nokia has a 360-degree camera on the market, and it was selling for the low price of just $60,000. Well, they have cut that, and they slashed it by $15,000, right? So instead of 60, you can have it for the even lower price of $45,000 US, which I know is still, I say that sarcastically, it's still crazy. But if you're a firm or an organization that has the revenue, the spending ability, and this is something that could benefit you because you're producing media or whatever, hey, that's not a bad price, right? But for consumers, obviously, it's not targeted at us. It would be astronomical, right? Unless you're richy rich. So, yeah, to basically see them not have something to do with mobility is just bizarro world for me. And I think the slashing of the price has a lot to do with the fact that not a lot of people are investing in it, right? And they want to make this attractive. They have a lot. They have the freaking company riding on Nokia's success in this new area because they had sold their mobile business to Microsoft, the phone portion, 2 years ago. They don't have eggs in many other baskets. It's this or maybe an end to Nokia, right? I don't want to sound sensationalist about it. For all I know, they do have other stuff on the go, but I know that this is a huge focus item for them. So we'll see. Is the $15,000 price drop going to do much for them? Well, I guess you'd have to compare it to other commercial 360 cameras, and I just haven't studied or researched it that in depth, right? But might be something I revisit later. The next news item has to do with an application for the HTC Vive called SoundStage. And we've talked about Tilt Brush, we talked about, I forget the name, it totally escapes me right now. Anyways, it was another content creation type tool. Well, this is that, but instead of VR content, specifically it's for music. And it utilizes room space, room VR. You are able to connect synthesizers with drums and equipment that you just couldn't do in the real world, right? And to be able to walk around it and interact with that equipment in unique ways that, again, you just couldn't replicate on a 2D screen. So this thing looks pretty cool, and it's basically $10, right? You look at something for $10, and honestly, a content creation tool like this, I wouldn't have thought would be that low. Maybe that's their price to establish themselves, get copies of this out there. Hey, that could be whatever the reason. But I think it's a fair price for an application that can deliver all of that, right? Because it's very specific and not game related. The next, she be a doozy. Better. The next article kind of pissed me off a little bit. And it's the old sensationalist headline. At least that was my initial reaction. And I'll clarify that point in a second. But it was basically, will immersive VR be too much for kids and their parents? This was on a website called recode.net. And, well, let's explore that for a sec. So my generation is Gen X. My parents were baby boomers. My grandparents were part of the greatest generation, right? If you're using all those generation labels. For all three of our generations, the classical tearjerkers, well, more so the baby boomers and ourselves, was the stuff like Old Yeller, Bambi, right? That kind of stuff. When you were a kid, those were the tearjerkers, the ones that really wringed the emotions out of you, right? In terms of sadness, that is. Well, this article goes on to try to make a case against VR, you know, being too damaging, too potentially damaging for kids and their parents. And I'm going to tie this in to another related article, but the two aren't from the same source, and you'll see, written totally different. But it actually gave more details in that second article to make me go back to the first one and say, you know what, there is a point here. They probably should have stated it like the other guys, but there's a point to this, right? So the other guys talk about VR Noir, which is an interactive kind of movie experience, right? And if we go back to the previous article or the previous headline where I mentioned that the VR is too immersive, it's too dangerous, there was a study done. And I try not to make those blanket statements. Usually, you want to have empirical evidence, facts, peer review, the kind of the important stuff, right, when you're establishing something. Now, with this study, what Stanford did is they tested a bunch of kids. They created a virtual reality experience that focused on virtual reality and the children's memory. And they basically put them in a virtual reality scenario where they were basically with whales, swimming with whales, right? They could get up close, they could reach their hand out, see these magnificent beasts swimming around. When they asked them about it, 50% reported it or talked about it as if it was an experience, like a memory. This happened. So if you look at it in that way, yeah, there's a little bit of merit to the statement in terms of there could be a greater impact. But I'm not one of those people, I don't like to blame something, right? And, perfect example of that is Tipper Gore, right? With her whole thing about video game violence and people with Napster. My thinking is, look, the person's a homicidal lunatic to begin with. If it wasn't this, it could have been a box of Shreddies that sets this person off, right? It wasn't Doom. It wasn't this. I just don't give that much credit. I don't believe that personally, right? With virtual reality, it has the potential because the experience. Now, for me personally, I don't feel that. When I go into VR, no matter how immersed I try to get myself, it's like I've got this built-in gaming mechanism that says, Epix, this isn't real. No matter how far into the rabbit hole I go, I've always got that realization that this is just a game. So if you have people with diminished mental capacity or whatever, I can see situations where, this could have longer term impacts. What those are, we don't know. That would all need to be studied. But it does at least give you a pause and kind of food for thought, right? To say that, look, yeah, maybe my 7-year-old kid shouldn't be playing this zombie game because they may have freaking nightmares for 6 weeks straight, right? I mean, I remember one movie, was it the Amityville Horror? My parents and their friends, we were over at their house talking about it, and I literally couldn't sleep for about 2 weeks. I was petrified because I kept remembering the things they were talking about, and kids' imaginations are fantastic, right? Dungeons and Dragons, all those other things. Well, when they were describing it, in my mind, I was picturing the pig face floating, you know, the little disturbed kid butchering this and that. And yeah, 2 weeks easily, I was scared shitless. I couldn't sleep. So for a young child, what would a VR immersive experience be like? Similar? Worse? Who knows? That will have to be studied. But like I said, interesting food for thought. That's it for news tonight, guys. As always, cheers. And I probably got another game video coming up in a little bit, so we shall see you on the flip side.